The chainsaw hit the trunk before I even opened the door. The sound ripped through the glass like it belonged inside my house. I froze for half a second, listening. Not a branch. Not trimming. Full cut. Deep. Final. I stepped outside barefoot. The deck was cold, but the air wasn't. It smelled sharp. Fresh sap. Something living just got erased. The sunlight hit me hard, right in the eyes. Too bright. Too direct. That wasn't normal. Then I saw it. The gap. Not one tree. Not two. My entire tree line, gone. 30 feet of old-growth evergreens, wiped clean like they'd never existed. The ground was covered in pale sawdust, still damp. Steam rose off the cut trunks in the morning air. That's when I noticed how far I could see. Straight through my property. Into the street. Into their yards. Too exposed. Way too exposed. 3 workers stood near the last stump. One shut off the saw. The sudden silence rang louder than the machine. No one looked at me. Not even once. Like I wasn't part of the equation. Like this had already been decided. I took a step forward. Gravel crunched louder than usual. Everything sounded louder now. Voices from down the street. A car door slamming. A dog barking 2 houses over. I'd never heard any of that before. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about trees. A white SUV idled at the curb. Engine low. Controlled. Waiting. The window rolled down slowly. Charlotte Pierce sat behind oversized sunglasses. Perfect posture. Perfect timing. She didn't wave. Didn't speak to me. Just looked past me. At the empty space. At the horizon she just bought herself. Finally, she said, barely above a whisper. I still heard it. Clear. Clean. Like the cut she just ordered. The workers packed up fast. No hesitation. No paperwork. No explanation. One of them glanced at the stumps, then back at the truck. Like even he knew something was off. Charlotte didn't move. She kept watching the light pour through my yard. It stretched across my windows, across my floor, deep into the house. It wasn't just brighter. It was invasive. It didn't belong there. My place had always been shaded. Controlled. Private. That was the point. That was why I bought it. And now it was gone in under an hour. Just like that. I stepped off the deck. My foot sank slightly into the soft layer of sawdust. Still warm. That detail stuck with me. This had just happened. Minutes ago. No notice. No warning. Just action. I looked at the property line. The markers were still there. Untouched. Exactly where they'd always been. Which meant one thing. They knew. They knew exactly where to cut. And they did it anyway. The SUV window slid back up. Charlotte's reflection vanished behind the glass. The car didn't rush. It didn't need to. It pulled away slow, like the job was clean. Finished. Like nothing else was coming. But something felt off. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something sharper. I turned back to the empty sky above my yard. The sunlight hit at an angle I'd never seen before. Too precise. Too direct. I squinted, tracking the line it made across the ground. That angle shouldn't have worked like that. Not unless something else lined up perfectly. And suddenly, I saw it. I did not move for a full minute after the car disappeared. The light kept pouring in, steady, almost surgical. It stretched across the ground and stopped right at the edge of my kitchen door. That line had never been there before. Not once in the 2 years I lived here. I walked back inside slowly. The air felt different. Warmer. Thinner somehow. My living room, which used to sit in soft shade all morning, was fully lit. Every surface exposed. Dust I never noticed before floated in the beam. It drifted like it had been waiting for this moment. That detail bothered me more than it should have. I set my keys down on the counter. The sound echoed. It never echoed before. I looked around the room. Same furniture. Same walls. But it felt like a different house. Like someone had removed a layer I did not know was protecting me. That is when I remembered why I chose this place. It was never about the house. It was about control. I design environments for a living. Not just how they look. How they behave. Light. Shade. Reflection. Heat. Every project I take on follows the same rule. If you control the light, you control everything else. Most people never notice it. They just feel it. They say a place feels calm. Or harsh. Or too bright. They never know why. But I always know why. That is why I bought this property. Those trees were not just privacy. They were a system. They filtered the morning sun. They blocked the west angle in the afternoon. They kept the interior temperature stable without relying on constant cooling. They shaped how the space worked. And now that system was gone. Just like that. I stepped closer to the window. The sunlight shifted slightly. It moved faster than I expected. That caught my attention. The angle was sharper than it should have been this time of year. I narrowed my eyes and followed the line across the floor. It hit the far wall at a point that did not make sense. That wall should have been protected by the tree line. Always had been. Which meant something else was now in play. I grabbed a pen from the counter and marked the edge of the light on the floor. Just a small line. Quick. Precise. I waited. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. The light moved again. Faster than normal drift. Too clean. Too direct. I felt that quiet shift again. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. This was not random. I stepped outside again. The air was warmer already. The ground where the trees stood was fully exposed now. No shadow cover at all. I looked toward the street. Then beyond it. That is when I saw the houses across from mine. Their windows lined up almost perfectly with the angle of the sun. Large glass panels. Polished surfaces. Decorative metal features along the fences. I had noticed them before, but never like this. Never connected. Now the light had a clear path. No interruption. No filter. Just a straight shot. I took a few steps to the edge of my property. The gravel shifted under my feet. I stood exactly where the first tree used to be. That position mattered. Everything in design comes down to position. I turned slowly, tracing the path of the sunlight with my hand. It started from the east. Cut through my yard. Cleared the street. And landed directly on Charlotte's side of the block. Not scattered. Not diffused. Focused. That was the problem. And also the opportunity. Most people would see an open view. I saw a corridor. A channel. Something that could be shaped. Redirected. Controlled. I looked down at the last stump near my feet. The cut was clean. Too clean for a rushed job. They had planned this. Measured it. Decided exactly where each tree would fall. which meant they believed they understood the outcome. That assumption stayed with me. I reached out and touched the surface of the stump. It was still warm from the saw. That warmth lingered longer than it should have. Another small detail. Another signal that something here was not finished. I straightened up and looked back at the line of empty sky above my yard. The sun was climbing, but the angle still held. Precise. Predictable. Useful. And in that moment, the entire layout clicked into place in my head. Not what they took. What they accidentally created. I stepped back toward the house, already mapping distances, surfaces, materials. I did not need to guess. I knew exactly how light behaves when it has nothing stopping it. And now, there was nothing stopping it. That was their mistake. And they had no idea what direction it was about to go next. I did not call anyone that morning. No lawyer. No HOA office. No police. I just watched the light. It moved across my floor in a clean line, steady and predictable. I checked my watch. Then I checked the angle again. Same pattern. No distortion. That told me everything I needed to know. They did not just remove trees. They removed resistance. I walked into my office and pulled open the bottom drawer. Old site plans. Survey copies. A full property scan from when I bought the place. I laid them out across the desk. The paper edges curled slightly under the sunlight. That had never happened before. Another small detail. Another confirmation. I grabbed a ruler and traced the original tree line. Then I marked where each trunk used to stand. 30 feet tall. Dense canopy. Natural diffusion. Gone. I shifted my focus to the surrounding properties. Charlotte's house sat slightly elevated. About 4 feet higher than mine. That mattered more than most people would realize. Elevation changes everything when it comes to light behavior. Her backyard faced west. Full exposure. During sunset. That was her prize. That was the reason she wanted the trees gone. The view. The horizon. The clean, open sky. But she missed something. Or maybe she never understood it in the first place. I stepped back outside with the plans in my hand. The sunlight hit the page and bounced upward. It caught me off guard for a second. The reflection was stronger than expected. I adjusted the angle slightly. The beam shifted fast. Too fast. That reaction stayed with me. I looked toward her property again. Large windows. Polished glass. Decorative steel railings. Light-colored stone surfaces. Everything designed to look clean. Bright. Expensive. And reflective. That last part was key. I crouched down near the edge of my yard. Right where the first tree used to block the view. I held the paper at a low angle and tilted it slowly. The reflected light stretched across the street. It landed just short of her front fence. I adjusted again. Just a few degrees. This time the reflection hit the metal railing near her patio. It flared for a second. Sharp. Focused. I lowered the paper immediately. That was enough. I did not need to test further. The system was already revealing itself. This was no longer about shade. It was about direction. I walked back inside and closed the door behind me. The temperature had already risen a few degrees. The air conditioner kicked on earlier than usual. Another effect. Another shift in balance. I stood in the center of the room and looked at the path of the sunlight again. Clean. Direct. Uninterrupted. That kind of path does not stay neutral for long. It either spreads or it concentrates. That depends on what you put in its way. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. No hesitation now. I pulled up material databases. Reflective panels. Treated glass. Polished alloys. I filtered by durability. By reflectivity index. By heat tolerance. This was not decorative work. This was functional design. Precision mattered. I selected a few options and began sketching. Simple at first. Then more defined. Panel height. Angle range. Mounting points. Distance from property line. Everything had to stay within legal limits. That part was important. I was not going to step outside my boundaries. They already did that for me. I checked local codes. Fencing regulations. Structure height allowances. Everything lined up. Perfectly. That made me pause. Just for a second. It felt too clean. Too easy. But the more I checked, the clearer it became. They removed the one element that would have blocked everything I was about to build. Without those trees, nothing stood in the way anymore. No natural filter. No soft edge. Just open air. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the low hum of the air conditioner. It struggled to keep up. That would only get worse by the afternoon. Especially when the sun dropped lower. I looked at the clock again. Still morning. Still early. And already, the system had changed. I saved the first draft of the design and stood up. Outside, the light had shifted another few feet across the yard. It moved exactly where I expected. Exactly how I predicted. That confirmed it. No guesswork. No uncertainty. Just physics. I stepped onto the deck and watched the beam extend farther toward the street. It touched the asphalt now. Clean line. No break. No shadow. That was the moment I knew they could not undo this. Because what they opened up was not just a view. It was a path. And I had just figured out exactly where it was going. I did not wait for the afternoon to prove it. I already knew what the sun would do. But I wanted to see how far they had pushed it. By noon, the light had crossed my entire yard. No shadows left. Not even near the fence. That had never happened before. I stepped outside again and felt the heat rising off the ground. The soil where the trees stood was already drying out. Fast. Too fast. Another shift. Another consequence they did not think about. I walked to the property line and looked across the street. Charlotte's place was quiet. Too quiet. The curtains were open wide. Full exposure. She wanted the view. She got it. But something felt unfinished. Like she expected more. That thought stayed with me. I turned and followed the path of the sunlight again. It was cleaner now. Stronger. No interference. It hit the street and bounced slightly off the asphalt. Then it continued forward. That bounce was new. I had not seen that before. I narrowed my eyes and traced it further. It reached the lower part of her front yard. Just barely touching the edge of her walkway. Not enough yet. But close. I stepped back into my yard and grabbed a metal garden tool leaning against the wall. Nothing special. Just a flat surface. I held it low and angled it toward the incoming light. The reflection jumped instantly. Bright. Sharp. It skipped across the street and landed directly on her driveway. I lowered it right away. That was enough confirmation. The path was active. Responsive. Waiting for direction. I set the tool down and stood still for a moment. Listening. A car passed behind me. Tires rolling slow. The sound carried further than usual. Everything carried further now. The space was open. Unprotected. I looked back at the empty line where the trees used to stand. Each stump sat in a perfect row. Too perfect. That level of precision does not happen by accident. They measured it. Planned it. Executed it clean. Which meant they believed they had control. That assumption was still there. Hanging in the air. I checked my watch again. Early afternoon now. The sun would start its descent in a few hours. That was the window that mattered. That was when the angle would tighten. When the energy would concentrate. I walked back inside and pulled up the design again. I adjusted the height of the panels. Increased the tilt range by a few degrees. Not much. Just enough to capture that lower angle. I changed the material on the surface. Higher reflectivity. Less diffusion. This was not about soft light anymore. This was about precision. I paused and looked at the numbers. Everything stayed within code. Every dimension legal. Every placement inside my boundary. That mattered more than anything. I was not going to give them a way out. I closed the laptop and stepped outside again. The sunlight had shifted another few feet. It now reached the center of the street. Still clean. Still uninterrupted. I could almost see the line it followed. Like an invisible thread stretched from one point to another. That kind of alignment does not last long in natural conditions. But right now, it held. Perfectly. I walked to the edge of the deck and looked directly at Charlotte's house. The glass along her back wall reflected the sky. Soft blue. Calm. Untouched. For now. That detail stayed with me. Reflection works both ways. Most people forget that. They think it only brings light in. They never consider what happens when it sends light back out. I stepped down into the yard and stood where the center tree used to be. This was the anchor point. The origin of the path. Everything would build from here. Distance. Angle. Timing. All of it depended on this exact position. I turned slowly, mapping the surroundings again. No obstructions. No barriers. Just open air. That was the final piece. I exhaled slowly and let the silence settle around me. No chainsaws now. No voices. Just wind moving through empty space. It sounded different. Hollow. Unfinished. I looked back at the sun. It had already begun its slow drop. Subtle. Almost unnoticeable. But I saw it. And when that angle shifted just a little more, everything they thought they gained was going to change direction. I tried the simple route first. I always do. I walked to the HOA office just after 2 in the afternoon. The building sat at the corner of the subdivision, glass front, clean lines, neutral colors. Designed to look official without actually being official. The door chimed when I stepped in. Cool air hit my face. Artificial. Controlled. Very different from what my house felt like now. A receptionist looked up from behind the desk. She smiled the kind of smile that stays on the surface. "Can I help you?" she asked. I nodded once. Kept it simple. "Someone cut down trees on my property this morning." Her smile did not move. That was the first sign. "Do you have a lot number?" she asked. No surprise. No concern. Just process. I gave her the number. She typed for a few seconds. Then stopped. Looked at the screen. Then back at me. "That work was approved under a community improvement request," she said. Calm. Practiced. I waited. She turned the monitor slightly. A document sat open. Clean formatting. HOA letterhead. My address. View corridor enhancement, she read. That phrase stayed with me. Corridor. They used the right word. Just not in the way they thought. That is private property, I said. No emotion. Just fact. She nodded slowly. The board determined those trees were obstructing a shared visual asset. Shared. Another word they liked. I looked at the date on the document. Approved 3 days ago. No notice sent. No signature from me. Just a line at the bottom. Charlotte Pierce. Of course. I exhaled once and leaned slightly closer to the counter. Who authorized entry onto my land? I asked. Her fingers tapped lightly on the desk. Not typing. Just tapping. The HOA has certain rights regarding aesthetic consistency, she said. She avoided the question. That was the second sign. I straightened up. Looked around the room. Framed photos of the neighborhood lined the walls. Clean lawns. Open views. No trees blocking anything. That was not accidental. That was branding. I turned back to her. I want a copy of that document, I said. She printed it without argument. That surprised me. The paper was still warm when she handed it over. Another small detail. Another confirmation. They believed they were covered. I stepped outside again. The heat hit harder this time. Mid-afternoon now. The sun had shifted lower. The angle was tightening. I walked to the edge of the parking lot and looked back toward my house. Even from here, I could see the gap where the trees used to stand. Clean. Open. Exactly how they wanted it. I unfolded the paper and read it again. Every line focused on appearance. Uniformity. Value. Not one mention of property boundary. Not one mention of permission. That omission mattered. A lot. I folded the paper slowly and slid it into my back pocket. Then I turned toward Charlotte's house. It sat quiet in the distance. Windows still wide open. Waiting for that perfect sunset she imagined. That thought almost made sense. Almost. I took a few steps forward, then stopped. Something caught my eye. The light had shifted again. It now reflected faintly off a car parked near her driveway. A soft flash. Quick. Easy to miss if you were not looking for it. I watched it happen a second time. Same angle. Same point of contact. That was enough. The system was already reacting. Without any modification from me. I stayed there for a few seconds longer, just observing. No rush. No reaction. That was important. They expected a reaction. A complaint. A fight. That is how these situations usually go. But this was not going to follow that pattern. I turned and walked back to my truck. Gravel crunched under my boots. The sound carried further now. Everything carried further. I opened the door and sat down for a moment without starting the engine. The interior felt cool. Quiet. Controlled. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead. Then I smiled. Not out of satisfaction. Out of clarity. They thought they improved something. They thought they removed an obstacle. But what they really did was remove the only thing that was protecting them. I stepped out of the truck again. Closed the door. And looked one last time at the path the sunlight was taking across the street. It was getting sharper by the minute. And soon, it was going to start hitting exactly where I wanted it to. I did not start building that day. I let the system run one more cycle. Late afternoon came slower than usual. The light stretched longer across the yard. Thinner. Sharper. I stood near the back door and watched it reach the far wall again. Same line. Same precision. No deviation. That consistency mattered. I stepped outside with a tape measure in my hand. No rush. Just data. I marked the exact point where the light crossed the edge of my deck. Then I walked 10 feet forward and marked it again. Same angle. Same direction. I checked the distance between the 2 points. Exactly what I expected. No variation. That told me the path was stable. Stable paths can be controlled. I moved toward the center of the yard and placed another marker where the largest tree used to stand. That spot felt different now. Warmer. More exposed. I crouched down and pressed my hand into the soil. Dry already. That fast change confirmed something else. Without the canopy, heat would build quicker. Surfaces would react faster. That would matter later. I stood up and looked toward Charlotte's house again. The sunlight now reached the lower section of her driveway. Just a faint touch. Easy to miss. But it was there. And it would only get stronger. I stepped back into the house and grabbed my laptop again. This time I opened the weather data. Solar angle charts. Seasonal shifts. I needed exact numbers. Not guesses. The sun would drop another 15 degrees over the next 2 hours. That was the window. That was when the energy would concentrate. I adjusted the design again. Increased panel height to 8 feet. That kept it within fence limits. Tilt angle adjustable between 20 and 40 degrees. Enough range to catch both mid and low sun. I switched the surface material again. Polished aluminum with a high reflectivity coating. Durable. Legal. Effective. I paused and ran the numbers twice. Everything aligned. No code violations. No overreach. Clean execution. That was important. I closed the laptop and stepped outside again. The air felt heavier now. The heat rising from the ground created a faint shimmer across the yard. I watched it for a moment. That distortion told me the energy was building. Exactly as expected. I walked to the property line and stood still. The light reached farther now. It touched the front edge of Charlotte's walkway. Still soft. Still weak. But that would change soon. I glanced down the street. A few neighbors moved casually. No one noticed anything yet. That was the best part. They thought the event was over. Trees cut. View opened. End of story. They had no idea the system had just started. I turned and walked back to the center of my yard. Every step felt deliberate now. No wasted motion. I picked up the metal tool again and held it at a slightly higher angle this time. The reflection jumped farther than before. It landed near the base of Charlotte's front window. Quick flash. Gone in a second. I lowered the tool immediately. That confirmed the next stage. The angle was entering range. I set the tool down and exhaled slowly. The timing was perfect. I looked back at the sky. The sun had dropped just enough to tighten the beam. Not wide anymore. Focused. Direct. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I walked to the edge of the deck and leaned slightly forward. Watching. Measuring. Calculating. Everything moved exactly where I predicted. No surprises. No errors. That level of control does not happen often. But when it does, you use it. I stepped back inside and grabbed my phone. Not to call anyone. To place an order. Panels. Mounts. Hardware. Everything expedited. Delivery first thing in the morning. No delays. I confirmed the order and set the phone down. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room again. It was working harder now. That was only going to get worse. I walked back to the window and watched the light creep higher across the far wall. It climbed slowly. Steady. Relentless. That behavior told me something else. Once I introduced reflective surfaces, that climb would not stop at my walls. It would continue. Straight across. Straight into their space. I stood there for a long moment, just watching the path unfold in real time. No noise. No movement. Just light doing exactly what it always does. Following the path that is given to it. And tomorrow, I was going to give it a new one. The truck pulled up at 7:18 the next morning. Earlier than scheduled. That caught my attention. Most deliveries in this area run late. Not early. The driver stepped out, checked the address, then looked at my yard for a second longer than necessary. The empty space where the trees used to be made everything feel exposed. Even strangers noticed it. He walked back to the truck and opened the rear door. The panels were stacked flat, wrapped tight, edges protected. Clean. Precise. Exactly what I ordered. I signed without saying much. No small talk. No delay. He left within 2 minutes. That part mattered. Less attention. Less questions. I carried the first panel to the center of the yard. It felt lighter than it looked. Solid, but balanced. I leaned it carefully against a temporary stand and stepped back. The surface caught the morning light immediately. Not strong yet. Still early. But the reflection was there. Clean. Controlled. I adjusted the angle slightly. Just a few degrees. The light shifted across the ground and stretched toward the street. Same path as yesterday. Same behavior. That consistency told me I was ready. I set the first mount into the ground. Measured twice. Tightened once. No mistakes. Each inch mattered now. I worked in silence. No music. No distractions. Just the sound of metal, tools, and the occasional breeze moving through empty space. The absence of the trees was still noticeable. Too noticeable. But that gap was exactly what made this possible. I installed the second panel 10 feet to the right of the first. Spacing had to be exact. Too close and the reflection would scatter. Too far and the beam would break. I checked alignment again. Perfect. I moved to the third position. Same process. Same precision. By the time the sun reached mid-morning, the structure began to take shape. 3 panels. Then 4. Each one angled slightly different. Not random. Calibrated. Designed to catch different phases of the sun's path. I stepped back and looked at the setup. From a distance, it looked simple. Almost decorative. That was intentional. Nothing about it looked aggressive. Nothing about it looked like a problem. That detail would matter later. I walked to the edge of the yard and watched how the light interacted with the panels now. It no longer passed straight through. It touched the first surface, shifted, then moved again. Controlled redirection. That was the first phase. I grabbed the tablet from the porch and pulled up the angle calculations. The numbers matched what I was seeing. No adjustment needed yet. I waited. That part was important. You do not rush the sun. It moves on its own schedule. Around noon, the reflections softened. The light spread slightly across the panels, losing intensity. That was expected. Midday is not the target. I used that time to reinforce the mounts. Tightened every bolt. Checked every connection. No weak points. I walked along the line and ran my hand across the surface of each panel. Smooth. Cool. Stable. That would change by afternoon. I knew it would. I stepped back again and looked across the street. Charlotte's house was quiet. No movement. Curtains still open. Windows still exposed. That had not changed. She wanted openness. She kept it. That thought stayed with me. I checked the time again. Early afternoon. The angle would begin shifting soon. I stood in the center of the yard and watched the sun drop inch by inch. Slow. Almost unnoticeable. But I saw it. And as it lowered, the reflections began to sharpen. The first panel caught the light again. Stronger now. It bounced to the second. Then to the third. Each transfer tightened the beam. Focused it. Directed it. I followed the path with my eyes. It reached the street. Then crossed it. This time, it did not fade. It held. I felt that shift again. The same one from yesterday. Quiet. Precise. I adjusted the second panel by a fraction of an inch. Barely visible. The beam responded instantly. It moved higher. Closer to Charlotte's property. Not quite there yet. But close. Very close. I stepped back and let the system run. No more adjustments. Not yet. I needed to see the full cycle. Needed to watch how it behaved at the exact moment the sun reached its lowest point. That was when everything would align. I stood there as the light continued its slow descent, watching the reflections grow sharper with every passing minute, and for the first time since they cut those trees, I could see exactly where this was going to land. The first flare hit at 4:37 p.m. Not bright enough to notice if you were not looking. But I was. The beam tightened as it left the third panel. Clean edge. No scatter. It crossed the street and touched the lower corner of Charlotte's front window. Just a flicker. Then it slipped away. I did not move. I watched the angle drop another inch. The second pass lasted longer. The reflection held for a full second this time. Long enough to register. Long enough to feel. I adjusted nothing. That was important. The system had to prove itself without interference. The third pass came sharper. The light hit the glass and bounced inward. I could not see inside from where I stood, but I saw the change in the reflection. Something shifted behind that window. Movement. Subtle. Then gone. I exhaled slowly and stepped closer to the first panel. Its surface had warmed under the sun. Not hot. Not yet. But building. I ran my fingers along the edge and checked the mount. Solid. No vibration. No drift. That stability kept the beam tight. I stepped back again and followed the path. Panel 1 caught the sun. Panel 2 refined it. Panel 3 aimed it. By the time it crossed the street, it was no longer soft light. It was directed. Intentional. I glanced at my watch. The window was opening. 10 minutes. Maybe 12. That was all I needed. The fourth pass struck higher on the glass. This time it stayed. 2 seconds. 3. Then it slipped off as the angle changed again. I saw the curtain inside shift. Just a little. Someone noticed. That was the first reaction. I kept my hands at my sides. No adjustments. Let it run. A car rolled down the street behind me. The driver slowed slightly, then kept going. The reflection must have caught his eye. It was still subtle. Still explainable. For now. I looked at the second panel and nudged it a fraction. Less than a quarter inch. The beam responded instantly. It climbed. Not much. Just enough to catch more of the window. That was the line I needed. I stepped back and waited. The fifth pass came in stronger. The light struck the glass and held. Not a flicker now. A presence. I saw the reflection flare across the interior for a brief moment. Then the curtain moved again. Faster this time. I heard something faint from across the street. A door. Maybe a voice. Hard to tell. Sound carried differently now. I did not need to hear it clearly. The reaction was enough. The sixth pass shifted again. Slightly lower. The beam traced across the window frame and dropped toward the patio door. That surface was larger. More reflective. More responsive. I watched as the light touched it and spread across the glass. Not wide. Still focused. But stronger. The system was amplifying itself. Each panel adding control. Each angle adding pressure. I felt that quiet certainty settle in again. Not excitement. Not anger. Just precision. I checked the mounts one more time. No movement. No slack. Everything held exactly where it needed to be. That mattered now more than anything. One loose angle and the beam would scatter. But it did not. It held. I looked back across the street. The curtains moved again. This time they closed halfway. Not all the way. Just enough to block part of the light. That told me something. They were reacting. But they did not understand it yet. They thought it was temporary. A moment. A coincidence. That assumption would not last long. The seventh pass hit the edge of the curtain and slipped through the gap. Narrow beam. Clean. It landed deeper inside than before. I saw the reflection bounce off something metallic inside the room. Quick flash. Then gone. I heard another faint sound. Closer now. Maybe a window shifting. Maybe someone stepping back. The details were not important. The pattern was. I stood still and let the sun continue its descent. The beam followed. Lower. Stronger. More direct. Every minute increased the intensity. Every second tightened the focus. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. No excess. No waste. Just control. I took one slow step back and looked at the full setup again. From this angle, it still looked simple. Still harmless. Panels in a yard. Nothing more. That illusion would not hold much longer. The eighth pass struck the patio door again, and this time, it did not slip away right away. The beam held longer this time. Not a flicker. Not a glance. It stayed on the patio glass like it belonged there. I watched the reflection deepen as the angle dropped another inch. The surface of the panel behind me caught more light, fed more energy forward, and the line across the street sharpened into something deliberate. The curtain inside Charlotte's house snapped shut halfway, then paused. That hesitation mattered. They still thought they could manage it. I took a slow step to the left and checked the second panel again. No shift. No drift. The mounts were holding perfectly. I kept my hands off it. The system was already doing exactly what I needed. A shadow moved behind the curtain. Then another. Someone crossed the room quickly. I saw the fabric pull tighter, then loosen again, like they were deciding how much to block. That told me they still did not understand the source. They were reacting to the symptom. Not the cause. The ninth pass struck higher, just above the midpoint of the glass. The reflection flared brighter this time. It bounced inward, then out again. Catching the edge of the metal railing on their patio. That secondary reflection created a brief flash that spread wider than before. Not uncontrolled. Just layered. I exhaled slowly and watched the pattern repeat. Panel 1 gathered. Panel 2 refined. Panel 3 aimed. The sequence stayed clean. No spill. No loss. That kind of efficiency does not happen by accident. I glanced down at the ground near my feet. The sawdust from yesterday had dried and lightened in color. The sun hit it directly now, turning the surface almost pale white. Even the ground was reflecting more light than before. Another small addition to the system. Another factor they never considered. A car door slammed across the street. Louder than it should have been. The sound carried through the open corridor without resistance. I heard footsteps on pavement. Fast. Then a pause. I did not turn. I kept my focus on the beam. The 10th pass came in lower and stronger. It struck the patio door and held. Not for seconds now. For longer. The reflection filled a narrow strip across the glass, steady and bright. I saw the curtain move sharply this time. Fully closed. Then reopened a few inches. Testing. Adjusting. They were trying to control something they could not see. That was the turning point. I stepped back one pace and let the system continue without me. No corrections. No interference. The sun dropped another fraction. The beam followed. It slipped through the small gap in the curtain and cut deeper into the room. Clean line. No distortion. I saw it catch something inside again. Another metallic surface. A picture frame maybe. The reflection bounced once, twice, then faded. But it would come back. It always comes back when the path is fixed. I heard a voice this time. Muffled. Frustrated. Words I could not make out, but the tone was clear. This was no longer a curiosity. It was a problem. I kept my stance relaxed. Hands at my sides. Breathing steady. Nothing about my yard looked aggressive. Nothing about the panel suggested intent. From the street, it still looked like a simple installation. That illusion protected me. For now. The 11th pass climbed slightly higher as the angle tightened. Again. The beam skimmed across the top of the curtain and struck the upper glass. The reflection spilled inward, brighter than before. Not harsh. Not blinding. Just persistent. That persistence was the key. Not intensity. Duration. I glanced at my watch. The window was narrowing. Another few minutes and the sun would drop below the optimal angle. That was fine. The system had already proven itself. I did not need full strength yet. I needed confirmation. And I had it. Across the street, the front door opened. Charlotte stepped out onto the walkway. Sunglasses on. Phone in hand. She looked toward the street first. Then toward my yard. Her gaze paused on the panels for a second longer than expected. Not recognition. Not yet. Just curiosity. She turned her head back toward her house as another pass hit the glass behind her. She stopped. Just for a moment. Something in the timing did not make sense to her. That pause was everything. She had noticed the effect. But not the cause. I stayed where I was and let the light continue its slow descent, knowing the next pass would line up even closer than the last. Charlotte did not go back inside right away. She stood there, still holding her phone, staring at the glass behind her like it had just betrayed her. The beam hit again. This time it lined up with the edge of the patio door and held longer than before. Not bright enough to cause panic. But too steady to ignore. She turned slowly and looked directly at the reflection point. Then she stepped to the side. The light followed the surface, not her. That was the moment she realized it was not random. I stayed still. No movement. No signal. Just watching. She lifted her phone slightly, like she was about to take a picture, then lowered it again. That hesitation told me she did not have an explanation yet. The next pass came in sharper. Lower sun. Tighter angle. The beam cut across the glass and slipped through the small gap in the curtain again. It reached deeper inside this time. I saw the faint glow bounce across the interior wall. Quick. Clean. Precise. Charlotte turned back toward the street, scanning left and right. Looking for a source. Her eyes passed over my yard. Again. This time slower. She noticed the panels. I could see it in the way her head paused. Not confusion. Not yet. Just awareness. The difference is subtle, but it matters. I shifted my weight slightly and stepped back half a pace. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to stay out of the direct line. The system did not need me now. The 12th pass landed higher on the glass. The reflection spread slightly across the upper section of the window. Not wide. Still controlled. But stronger. The material inside her house responded again. Another brief flash. Then gone. She flinched. Small movement. Almost nothing. But I saw it. That was the first physical reaction. Not from the light itself. From the unpredictability. She turned and walked quickly toward the front door. Not running. Not rushed. Just faster than before. The door opened. Closed. Silence. The curtains inside shifted again. Fully closed now. No gaps. No testing. That told me something else. They were switching from curiosity to defense. I let out a slow breath and looked back at the panels. The surfaces had warmed further. The reflections were cleaner now. More efficient. I checked the alignment without touching anything. Still perfect. That mattered. One wrong move and the illusion would break. I stepped to the side and followed the beam again as it crossed the street. The angle was reaching its peak window. This was as tight as it would get today. The 13th pass hit the curtain directly. The fabric absorbed some of the light, but not all. A faint glow bled through. Soft. Persistent. It spread across the inside surface like pressure building behind a wall. I heard movement again. Faster this time. Footsteps. A muffled voice. Then another. Not calm. Not controlled. I did not need to hear the words. The rhythm said enough. I kept my posture relaxed. Hands down. Breathing steady. From the outside, nothing looked aggressive. Just panels catching sunlight. That detail protected me more than anything. The 14th pass shifted slightly lower. It traced along the edge of the curtain and found a narrow seam near the side. The beam slipped through. Clean. Direct. It landed deeper inside than before. The reflection bounced again. This time twice. Quick flashes. Enough to create motion across the interior wall. That kind of movement draws attention. It demands it. I saw the curtain pull tight again. Someone inside pressed it flat against the glass. Trying to block it completely. That would not hold for long. Fabric is not a barrier. Not for this. I stepped back another pace and looked at the full system again. From this distance, it still looked simple. Still harmless. But the pattern had changed. The reaction had changed. That was the shift I needed. Across the street, the front door opened again. Charlotte stepped out, this time without her phone. She looked directly at my yard. No hesitation now. Her eyes moved across the panels, one by one, slower than before. Not curiosity anymore. Not confusion. Something closer to recognition. She stood there for a second, then another pass hit the glass behind her, and she did not turn away fast enough. She did not step back this time. She stood there and let the light hit the glass behind her again. The reflection flared across the surface and spilled inward, and for a split second, it outlined her silhouette in the window. That was new. That had not happened before. The angle had finally aligned. Perfectly. She turned slowly, not away from the light, but toward my yard. Direct. Focused. No more guessing. She saw the panels. All of them. The spacing. The alignment. The intent. Her posture changed. Subtle, but clear. Shoulders tightened. Chin lifted slightly. That was recognition. Not confusion. Recognition. I did not move. I let her look. The 15th pass came in stronger. The beam cut across the patio door and climbed higher across the glass, holding longer than any previous cycle. The reflection inside her house intensified. Not chaotic. Controlled. Predictable. That predictability is what makes it impossible to ignore. She raised her hand slightly, shielding her eyes even though she was not directly in the beam. That reflex told me everything. She felt it now. Not just saw it. I took a slow breath and shifted my weight again, just enough to keep my position neutral. The system was at peak efficiency for the day. No need to push further. The 16th pass struck the upper corner of the glass and held. The beam did not flicker. It stayed. A steady presence. I heard a sharper movement from inside her house. Something set down quickly. Maybe a chair. Maybe a table edge. The sound carried clean through the open corridor my yard had become. That detail still amazed me. They had opened more than a view. They had opened a channel. Charlotte stepped forward off the walkway and onto the edge of her driveway. Closer to the street. Closer to the path of the light. She did not look at the reflection this time. She looked straight at me. That was the shift. The connection had been made. I held her gaze for a second. Then I looked back at the panels. Calm. Measured. No reaction. That lack of reaction mattered more than anything I could say. The 17th pass dropped slightly lower as the sun continued its descent. The beam traced across the curtain again, but this time the fabric did not stop it completely. A faint glow pushed through, steady and persistent. I saw her glance back at the window. Then back at me. That comparison told her everything she needed to know. Cause and effect. Finally connected. She took one step forward. Then stopped. Not crossing the street. Not yet. That hesitation mattered. She was calculating now. Just like I had been. But she was behind. The 18th pass came in sharper again. It struck the glass and held longer than any before. The reflection inside her house expanded slightly, catching more surface. Not spreading out of control. Just growing. Layer by layer. I watched her expression shift. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. That quiet moment when the situation no longer fits the explanation you had for it. I stepped back half a pace and let the system continue without me. No adjustments. No interference. The panels held their alignment. The beam followed its path. The environment did the rest. That is how you build something that lasts. You do not force it. You guide it. The 19th pass slid lower as the sun dropped again. The beam moved across the glass and slipped through a narrow seam near the edge of the curtain. It reached deeper inside than before. I saw the reflection bounce once, then twice, then hold for a fraction longer. That repetition created a pattern. Patterns are what people notice. Patterns are what break denial. Charlotte exhaled slowly. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped for a second. Then she straightened again. Composure returning. Control, or at least the appearance of it. She looked back at the panels one more time. Longer now. Studying them. Trying to understand the structure. The angles. The purpose. But she did not have enough information. Not yet. I turned slightly and walked toward the center of my yard. Not leaving. Just repositioning. The light followed its path without me. That was the point. It did not need me anymore. The 20th pass hit the glass again, and this time, it did not fade as quickly. The 20th pass did not fade. It held across the glass like a line that had finally found its endpoint. The reflection inside her house stayed longer than before. Not seconds anymore. It lingered. That was the shift. Duration over intensity. That is what changes behavior. Charlotte did not move right away. She stood there, watching the light press against her own window. Then she turned slowly and walked back inside. The door closed behind her with a sharper sound than before. I heard it clearly. The corridor carried everything now. I stayed where I was. No adjustments. No movement. The system had entered its final phase for the day. The sun dropped another inch. The beam followed. It slid lower across the glass and widened just slightly. Not enough to lose focus. Just enough to touch more surface. I saw the curtain inside shift again. This time it did not stop halfway. It pulled fully across the window. Tight. Complete. A full block attempt. I watched the light meet the fabric. It softened on contact, but it did not disappear. A glow formed behind the curtain. Subtle at first. Then steadier. The material could not absorb all of it. Not at this angle. Not with this consistency. I heard movement inside. Faster now. Multiple steps. A voice again. Closer to the glass. The tone sharper. That told me something had changed. This was no longer a minor inconvenience. It was becoming a condition. I stepped back toward the first panel and checked the angle again without touching it. Still perfect. No drift. No loss. The system was stable. That stability meant it would repeat. Tomorrow. The next day. Every clear afternoon. That was the real effect. Not a single moment. A pattern. I turned my head slightly and looked down the street. A neighbor stood on the sidewalk a few houses away. Watching. Not close enough to understand. But close enough to notice something unusual. That detail mattered. The effect was becoming visible beyond the original target. I looked back at Charlotte's house. The curtain moved again. This time a small gap opened near the side. Just a few inches. Enough to test the outside conditions. The beam found it immediately. It slipped through the opening and cut into the room again. Clean. Direct. I saw the reflection bounce once, then hold against an interior surface. Longer than before. The gap snapped shut. Fast. Too fast to be casual. That reaction told me everything. They were trying to adapt. But they did not have control of the variable that mattered. I took another slow breath and stepped back toward the center of my yard. The panels stood in a clean line. Quiet. Still. From a distance, nothing about them looked aggressive. That illusion held strong. And it would continue to hold. Because there was nothing illegal about what I built. Nothing outside my boundary. Nothing that violated code. Just surfaces. Angles. Light. The 21st pass came in lower. The beam traced along the bottom edge of the curtain and slipped through another seam. It reached deeper inside again. That repetition built pressure. Not physical. Psychological. The kind that does not go away when the moment ends. I heard the front door open again. Charlotte stepped out once more. Faster this time. No hesitation. She looked at the panels first. Directly. Then at me. The connection was fully formed now. No confusion left. She took 2 steps toward the street and stopped. Measuring distance. Measuring intent. I stayed still. Let the silence sit between us. The sun dropped another fraction. The beam followed. The 20-second pass struck the glass again, and even from where I stood, I could tell this one was going to last longer than the rest. The 20-second pass settled in and did not move. Not right away. The beam locked across the glass like it had found its final position. I watched the reflection hold inside her house, steady and quiet, like something that had always been there. Charlotte stopped mid-step. Her eyes flicked from the panels to the window behind her, then back to me. That loop repeated twice. That was the moment she understood it would not stop on its own. The sun had reached its lowest workable angle. This was the peak. Not brighter. Just longer. The kind of presence that lingers. I stayed where I was, hands relaxed at my sides. No adjustment needed. The system was complete. The panels had done their job. The corridor did the rest. Charlotte took one more step forward, then another, closing the distance to the street but not crossing it. That line mattered. She knew it. I knew it. The space between us stayed intact. The beam shifted slightly lower, then held again, brushing the edge of the curtain and slipping through a narrow seam that had not been there before. That small opening changed everything. The reflection inside her house deepened. Not wide. Not scattered. Focused. I saw it catch a surface and stay. Longer than any previous pass. That was the difference. Not intensity. Persistence. She turned quickly and walked back toward the door. Faster now. The door opened, closed. The curtain snapped fully shut again. But the glow remained. Faint. Constant. A presence behind fabric. I could still see it from where I stood. That detail stayed with me. Blocking the view did not remove the effect. It only changed how it felt. I looked down at the ground near my feet. The pale sawdust reflected the last light of the day, sending a softer glow upward into the panels. Even the ground had become part of the system. That had not been part of the plan. But it fit. It all fit. I stepped back one pace and let the scene settle. No more movement. No more correction. The sun continued its slow drop. The beam lowered with it, sliding across the glass one last time before beginning to fade. Not disappear. Just weaken. That was expected. The cycle always ends. But what matters is that it starts again. Tomorrow. Same angle. Same path. Same result. I heard the front door open again. Slower this time. Charlotte stepped out and stood still on the threshold. She did not come closer. She did not speak. She just looked at the panels. Then at the empty line where the trees used to be. Then back at the panels again. The connection was complete now. No confusion left. No doubt. Just understanding. I held her gaze for a second. Then I looked away. Back at the panels. Calm. Measured. Like this was always the design. The last pass of the day faded off the glass and disappeared into the street. The light softened. The heat dropped slightly. The system went quiet. But the effect did not. It stayed in the memory of what just happened. That is what matters. Not the moment. The repetition. The certainty. Charlotte stood there for a few seconds longer, then stepped back inside without closing the door all the way. That small detail told me everything. She was not finished with this. Not even close. I turned and walked toward my house, leaving the panels exactly where they were. No need to hide them. No need to explain them. Everything about them was within my line. Within my space. Within my control. I paused at the door and looked back one last time. The yard was quiet again. Empty. Open. Exactly how they wanted it. But now, it behaved differently. It responded. It redirected. It remembered. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, knowing that when the sun came back down tomorrow, the path would be waiting right where I left it.